My name is Jussi Enroos. I work at Reaktor. It's a Finnish consulting company. And among other kinds of clients, we also work with games companies. And at Reaktor, I'm a developer. And additionally, I do recruitment interviews. And in that capacity, I get to meet a lot of great new people and read their CVs and LinkedIn's and GitHubs and so on. And today we're here to talk about GitHub. So while GitHub is not typically your main professional online presence, it's still pretty important. So let's jump into it. This is my my view of how I look at things that are in GitHub for people who apply, and the people that we're looking for, and other kinds of like advice regarding finding a job is available in this link. I hope this PDF will be available for you later, but it's also here in the video. It's things that we at Reaktor have gathered that are beneficial to at least have been beneficial to us, and we hope that it will be beneficial to others as well. So sharing is caring, I guess. So of course, when we talk about GitHub, we talk about code, and the developers often, well, as you know, like to code. So there is different kinds of information available about you in the internet, and of course there's LinkedIn profile, which should be typically up to date, but then the other kind of information is the code, and that's where GitHub and similar services come in. And I'd like to also know that there are roughly two kinds of recruitment discussions. So one kind is where you approach the company and possibly apply for a job, and the other kind is where they approach you. So that's often called sourcing, and that's when GitHub becomes important as well, because they only have the information available that they can find of you online. So like before they make the contact, they will look and they will make the decision of making the contact based on the available information. And now we want to optimize our LinkedIn and of course GitHub to be as enticing as possible. And when you're the one applying, then I'd like to encourage to, with your cover letter, send links to your repositories directly, and not just share the GitHub profile, but do send links to repositories that you think that are representative of your skills and things that you want to show, because we don't want ourselves typically to be evaluated based on repositories that are 10 years old and there are like 5 commits there. So especially if you have a lot of repositories, it makes a lot of sense to make like point the recruiters to the right place, that this is where I want you to look at. And of course, make sure GitHub is at least mentioned in the CV. So what we want to see when we go to people's GitHub, of course, what is possible to see there is that, first of all, you can code and you can like make reasonable decisions there. The other thing is that you do code. So obviously, game developers in general write code at work, but it's often, at least in my nature, it is common to try to learn new things on our own as well. So we do, as developers, code our own projects and so on. And of course, some kind of coding skills can typically be inferred from GitHub and the repositories there, but that of course depends on the kinds of project that we have there. And GitHub is based on like the principles of open source in general. So that automatically says something about teamwork. And of course, if a GitHub profile contains mainly private repositories or own hobby project, then there might not be that much teamwork aspects there, but it's good to know, and it's a good thing to keep in mind when tailoring your GitHub profile to be interesting. Of course, not all recruiters care about the same things that I do, so I try to mention things that I think that are my opinions, and then veer towards the general stuff that typically just looks good on a GitHub profile. So while there's a lot of opinions involved, a lot of the things that I'm talking today is a general good stuff that should be taken into account, just to make sure that the GitHub profile and the repositories look good. Right, let's take a look at an empty GitHub profile and what can we see there, because there's pretty much nothing, but we can already see like what the GitHub profile looks like. So there's the place for image, name, and stuff, some tabs, popular repositories says nothing, and then there's the contributions tab. Now taking a look a repository of a colleague of mine, we can see that he has put his name there. Sorry. He has a few repositories there, and then has made random contributions every now and then. And what immediately jumps up here is the popular repositories, which is completely customizable. So I think they used to be called pinned repositories, but there's, I think, at least 6 slots where you can put your favorite or most meaningful repositories for the recruiters and everyone else to see. And that's also, if you have some popular repository that people actually come to fork or to star, then having this page in order makes sure that those people, if they happen to click your profile link, get to see your other stuff as well. You might have something that interests them. And we can see the customize pins button on the top right, where you can select and reorder those repositories that are visible there. And in this example, we can see that there's even a start repository that has 2 stars, but most of this has like very little information. They might not have like even programming languages mentioned, so it's unclear what's in them, and there's no description. So I think we can guess there's something to improve here. Another thing that is typically shown next to this is the types of contributions. So now, even though GitHub is a coding platform or a platform to save our code, there are other kinds of contributions that we can make as well, and those are highlighted in the front page. So we can create pull requests typically by forking a repository, creating a branch, and making changes. It's possible to create a pull request towards the main repository. We can review other people's pull requests, and we can raise issues. So if there are bugs in some projects, it's typically a good habit to write down those things. If it's not already raised as an issue there, we can raise an issue, and it also appears here as a contribution. And I mentioned that there are teamwork aspects and social aspects in GitHub as well, and these pull requests, code reviews, and issues are a good sign that that a candidate or a developer is doing other things than just writing code in their own repositories. Next, we'll take a look at a bit more complete repository. This is again a colleague of mine because he has way better looking GitHub repository than I do. The first thing we notice here, because we're human, we're prone to look at people's faces. We notice the face. So having a good image there is typically a positive thing. It gathers the or it highlights the repository. Then, if possible, having your real name is a good thing to link toward, like it links this profile to your other maybe online presence or other things. So it's easier for the recruiter to check that, okay, this is actually the person who I think it is. And then of course there are other ways to tell who or where you are, like where you work, and if you have some other online presence, it can be linked here on the left. Good things to notice, because then you if there are links between your different online profiles, then it's easier for the recruiters to follow you as well. And of course, when you apply for a job in Finland, at least, there's a law that says that the recruiter cannot like Google you in the internet. And I think many companies actually follow that law. So it's a good thing to link all your meaningful online presence profiles in your CV as well. Like Twitter might not be meaningful unless you tweet something of your new game project and so on, but at least GitHub and LinkedIn typically should be there. Then we have the contributions, or the activity bar in the bottom, which shows the part that you actually do code. So if you're a hobbyist, or if you have hobby projects or work projects that can show here, that means that the recruiter can immediately see that you actually code constantly, and that's like a good sign in general. And if you don't have meaningful stuff in GitHub, then this will not look that good. But then it's again maybe good to mention in the cover letter or in some other place that this GitHub profile is mainly for hobby projects and not maintained, and so on. So as not to set up wrong kinds of expectations. Then the number of repositories is shown here. It tells us different kinds of things, because it might mean that you have just forked a bunch of repositories and done nothing there. But on a quick glance, it's typically easy to see that they might be like repositories that you worked on in other places, or you might have just a bunch of different kind of hobby projects, or you have tried out technologies and so on. It's always a good thing to like typically, for example, when I try out a new technology, I automatically create a Git repository. Oftentimes I don't have an upstream anywhere, so it's not in GitHub or anywhere, but it might be a good idea to just have those there as well, to show that you actually have the habit of coding or trying out new stuff. Also in this project area, a good thing to notice is that it mentions the main programming languages in these repositories. And at least to me, a good sign is that the developer is working with multiple different programming languages. So if all of these are C++ or C#, then it's while it's possibly a good sign that you are fluent in those languages, then it's also a sign that you might not be aware of like different languages. And to me, like I know that this is like a personal idea. It's important that people dabble into different programming languages, because then they get different ideas that can flow into work with the other languages as well. And learning new stuff always keeps the brain a bit more moldy. I'd like to say, like moldable, not as in the mold that grows in the forest. And finally, we can see the organizations here. So again, the social and teamwork aspect. If you work for different non-profits or companies and so on. It shows here, and typically good activity in GitHub correlates with having more organizations here as well. Not a necessity, but still. Then for many of us work in projects that are for a company, but they are private repositories in GitHub. There's a switch in the settings that allows you to show private contribution in this contribution or activity timeline. And there's a clear difference. If you have such projects or a bunch of such projects, there's a clear difference, of course, of having it on or off. Because and that's one way of being able to show that activity. Then let's take a look at a hobby project from a colleague of mine. So taking a taking a short overview, what are the things that you think you see here? First of all, in the top, there's no description. There are no topics, websites, or tags or anything. We can see that there's a bunch of commits. So this is a project that has actually been worked on. I can see 4 contributors, which means that in addition to this having been worked on, this has also been worked on with some kind of a team. So something has done, and it has not been done alone. Sounds good. It's an old project because the oldest files in the root seem to be 5 years ago. Git ignored typically doesn't change a lot over time, but it's still been updated within a year. It says 6 months here. Okay, the latest commit says 2019, so this is a bit of an old screenshot, but at the time of looking at this, it means that this is somewhat updated every now and then. So it probably has some kind of purpose, this project, but we have no idea what that purpose might be because there's no description, no website, no topics, and no README. So if we had that information, it might actually be useful information as for me as a recruiter, but right now it's pretty hard to say what this is about without digging deeper into the commits and the code and so on. Because the recruiters typically, well, this differs from company to company again. In my company, we get a lot of applications, and it's just not possible to dig deeply into every repository of every applicant. So having the front pages well managed is typically a good thing and very beneficial for them. Going forward from the front page, there is on the top right, there is an Insights tab, which actually tells us a bit more about this. Because if there are a lot of collaborators in a project, the contributions can be seen as a time series here. So this kind of tells if there's a forked project or a project somewhere where you have contributed, but there's only like one commit. It might mean that that's like your typical Hacktoberfest commit of changing one word in some README file to get stickers or a t-shirt. So this kind of tells us that what is the level of your commitment towards this project in general. Good to know, good to check out the other tabs as well. And I mentioned that there are private repositories. Sometimes we don't get to choose whether or not have the repositories private because they're like work related, if they are at GitHub at all even. But at least for me, it's not uncommon to, as I mentioned, to spin up a project, run git init on the command line and make commits, because then it's easier to come back if I have broken something. But I've seen a typical pattern of people just putting their test projects into GitHub, but making them private repositories because, well, there might be multiple reasons for that. But I would, again, even if those private contributions can now be seen in the activity, I would reconsider that, because I would argue that oftentimes the visibility of the project and the visibility that you have tested at least something is more important than just hiding it. Or even if you have a superior game project that you think has a technology that will change everything, it oftentimes, well, at least in my experience, for me, it hasn't changed everything quite often, even though I have thought that I have had something really cool, or people are not even interested. But having that visible out there that I have done something is often more important, than, to me at least, than to keeping those secrets in private. But that's, of course, depends on you and your project. But oftentimes I would argue that it's better to make a public repository instead of a private. And then when there's time to go through a specific repository, especially if you send a specific repository link in your cover letter or in your application, then it would be great to see some effort put into the commit messages or the version history, because that tells something of the communication that you use. So these are some of my old commit messages, like comments and stuff, files, some initial code. Doesn't really tell anything about what's been done, and it doesn't help myself. It doesn't help anyone else to have this information there. So there are like I guess there are almost as many right ways of writing good commit messages as there are people writing them, and there are, like, I know there are strong opinions to many directions about these. My way of going forward is using the same format as Git itself uses and GitHub uses. It's like the the format is that commit message should complete the sentence that when this commit is applied, it will, and then, for example, add 9 sprite, which is one of the commits shown here. So it typically starts with a verb and then tells what happens in this commit. That's my way of doing it. You might have your own opinion on that as well. But using a consistent approach is typically the best way to go. Then the README files. They're while they are not important for, like, actually from the code point of view, they are actually the face of the repository. So I have some links of, like, best practices and an example of a really good README here of a Pac-Man game AI thing. So as mentioned before, there was this repository that didn't have a README. It didn't really tell anything about the repository. And a good README is, well, there are, like, many different ways of doing good READMEs, but one of the things I've often thought that it, like myself, is to be brief, but that's not always the case, and oftentimes not at all. Because here's a really good README of a project, and we can just see the very tip of it. It has a lot of things on it. So since showing through a full README is not really feasible, I have listed some of the things that a good README might have. So first of all, what the project is, why it even exists. If it's something that can be like run online, if it's running somewhere, it's great to show that. If you, for example, have it like I have a game project that runs on a website, I link to that, and how to like build and run locally, how to make a deployment, if there are tests in there, how to run them, possibly how the project stands out from other similar projects. And then it's nice to have showcases like screenshots, example code, if it's like a library and so on. And then of course, how to contribute if you are willing to take contributions from other people. That you can also mention that's not a good thing. I have one slide and link to a documentation framework, because the README can also serve as a kind of documentation for the project. There are like different ways of approaching, but this one has been a useful framework, at least to framing what different kinds of documentations there are out there, and what they try to accomplish, like what is the purpose of that. One last mention. Nowadays, it's possible to have your personal README file in GitHub, which is the perfect place to tell which repositories in your profile are important and for which reasons, or which ones are the ones that you're currently working on, and maybe the ones that you have abandoned, and so on, if that's something you want to tell. And of course, since GitHub is a social media of a kind now, this is the place where you can tell a bit more about yourself for those recruiters who are sourcing candidates, if you wish. So there we go. Mostly these things that I mentioned apply to GitHub, GitLab, SourceForge, all these different services, and so on. I hope I mentioned everything I wanted to mention, because there's a lot of things out here. But thank you. I think it's still a few minutes for questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jussi. At the moment, I'm using GitHub Desktop. What do you think? Should I switch to Git Bash? Which one prefers from the recruiter's point of view?
From the recruiter's point of view, it's important that you know which one you use and why. It's not important which one you actually use. So, for example, I use SourceForge typically, which is like a free desktop software. But for certain things, I still use the command line Git. Excuse me. So a good question. I think like the client that you use for Git is not important, but like if you have a preference, it's good to be able to say what is your preference and why.
Which is better? Which is better practice from recruiter's point of view? New profile only for job application stuff, the official, or your hobby one that shows every repos that are unrelated to gaming?
To me personally, I'd more gladly see your hobby one. And if you create a new profile for only job application stuff, that I guess that doesn't really tell us much more than just the job application things. I would preferably see like things you have done in the past. You can just label them that, okay, these are old things and not that important, but they communicate already that you do code and how much you do that, like as a hobby as well. And that's a positive sign, at least to me.
Thank you very much, Jussi. I think we're running out of time, but Jussi, if you can stay a couple of more minutes, there's a couple of more questions to answer.
Sure, I'll write the answers to the chat.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.